Hey there, sleepy traveler. Before you drift off into dreams, let's take a quiet step back, way, way back, to the ancient banks of the Nile River, a time of golden sun, silent temples, and gods who whispered through the wind and watched over every grain of sand. Yes, tonight we're visiting ancient Egypt. But before you start imagining gold-tipped pyramids and regal pharaohs lounging in shade, let me gently ruin that vision. Because as beautiful as ancient Egypt looks in textbooks and museum gift shops, living there, even for just one day, wasn't exactly a spa vacation. In fact, you probably wouldn't last till lunchtime. But don't worry, you won't have to, because we're only visiting in our minds. So dim your lights, fluff your pillow, maybe turn on a little fan for that gentle hum, and let's drift together into a world both ancient and uncomfortable. Wake up, it's already too hot. The sun rises early in Egypt, not with a whisper, but with a blazing, undeniable roar. You're sleeping, well, more like resting, on a scratchy straw mat in a hut made of reeds and mud. No door, no curtains, no glass windows. Just the open desert air and a sky that doesn't believe in subtlety. Even before your eyes fully open, the sun has already declared war on your comfort. There's no snooze button here. The light cuts through the gaps in your hut like hot knives, and the temperature already well on its way to baking mode long before breakfast. You pull at your thin linen sheet. It's more ceremonial than practical. It offers no warmth, no cool, just a whisper of dignity as you roll over and realize this is your life. The breeze? Yes, that legendary Nile breeze everyone talks about in documentaries. That cool, mystical wind? Yeah, it's gone. Vanished sometime around 2800 BC. Probably took early retirement. And so begins your day. With a body half-cooked and eyes half-open, you drag yourself upright. Your clothes? A simple linen tunic, but's about as useful as wearing a napkin in a bonfire. It clings to you, soaked in sleep sweat. You wonder briefly if linen was designed by Ra himself just to mock human suffering. And sunscreen? Oh, sweet, naive modern thoughts. There's no aloe, no SPF, no wide-brimmed sun hat. You might find a jar of clay mixed with crocodile dung if you're lucky or unlucky, but most likely you'll rely on the oldest Egyptian sun protection method of all, sheer hope. Chapter 2. Ra is watching. Try not to complain. Here's the thing. In ancient Egypt, the sun wasn't just hot. It was holy, divine, the big boss in the sky. Ra, the sun god, didn't just warm the earth, he ruled it. So if you're sweating through your tunic, blinking through the heat haze, and secretly wishing for a thunderstorm, you're not just uncomfortable, you're borderline blasphemous. Complaining about the sun? That's like walking into a church and rolling your eyes at the altar. Every bead of sweat is technically a sacred tribute. So keep it together, smile, and sip your water, if you have any. Dehydration? That's a you problem. A walk to the Nile with flies, frogs, and fun. Eventually, your body gives up on the idea of lying down, and you shuffle outside. The ground beneath your feet is already warming up like a preheated oven. The bricks you walk past are sweating, or maybe you're imagining that. At this point, everything feels like it's melting, including your will to exist. But there is relief on the horizon, or at least something resembling it. The Nile. The sacred river. The mighty, shimmering artery of Egyptian civilization. Feeder of crops, keeper of spirits, giver of life. And, somewhat less romantically, communal bathhouse, dishwasher, trash chute, and crocodile buffet. Before you even see it, you smell it. A mixture of damp earth, algae, fish, livestock, and something darker. Upstream, someone probably dumped something unholy into the water last night. A broken pot, a dead goat, maybe even a used embalming cloth. But still, this is where you bathe. Soap? Not invented. Shampoo? Only if you consider sand a cleansing agent. So you do what everyone else does. Step into the murky waters, rub yourself down with coarse handfuls of riverbank grit, and pretend it's exfoliation. A spa treatment. Shoes optional at best. Most ancient Egyptians went barefoot, not because it was comfortable, but because shoes were either too expensive or too pointless. The streets were dust, grit, occasional sharp pebbles, and the occasional surprise left behind by donkeys, goats, and possibly your neighbor's loose goose. If you were lucky, you might have a pair of sandals woven from palm leaves. They wouldn't protect your feet from anything sharp or pointy, but they made you look respectable, like you might know someone who works in a temple. Now, by this time, the sun has officially entered its I hate everyone phase. It's no longer just hot, it's aggressive. The kind of heat that sits on your shoulders like a judgmental god, pressing down harder with every step you take. Even the insects are sluggish now, buzzing lazily in the heavy air like they too are questioning their life choices. You duck into your home, a humble mud brick structure that you share with your entire family and probably a few animals too. There's no such thing as a personal room, just open space, low ceilings, and the constant sound of someone snoring, coughing, or complaining about how dry the bread is. The walls sweat, the floor cracks, and the roof, a mixture of palm fronds and prayer, is just one gust away from collapse. Privacy? That's a luxury reserved for pharaohs and cats. It's too hot to cook anything, which is fine because you weren't going to eat anything fancy anyway. Maybe some lentils soaked in yesterday's water, or dried fish that smells like it's been cursed. Whatever it is, you eat it with your hands quickly before the flies claim it first. The children eat too, loud and sticky, and then run off to chase chickens through the alley like it's a national sport. Mid-afternoon arrives, and with it, your one short break from labor. But don't imagine a siesta on a hammock with palm leaves swaying gently in the breeze. No, you crouch in the thin shadow cast by the crumbling corner of your house, sipping warm water from a clay jar and trying not to think about the fact that you'll be back in the fields or hauling stone as soon as the sun shifts again. And even during this break, the work never truly stops. Your mind is still ticking. How much grain you need to grind tonight, whether your neighbor is stealing your goat again, whether the gods noticed that you skipped your morning prayer. Let's pause for a moment and talk about the gods, because in ancient Egypt, the gods are everywhere. Every breath you take, every grain of barley you plant, every time you stub your toe, it all ties back to some divine force who may or may not be in a good mood today. There's a god for the sun, a god for the air, one for death, one for protection, one for scorpions, and yes, even a god for sleep. Though judging by the bags under your eyes, that one's probably on vacation. You pray to them constantly, not because you're devout. Well, you are, kind of, but mostly because not praying means something might go wrong. Your crops might fail, your cow might collapse, your neighbor might accuse you of stealing his pickled onions, and next thing you know, you're being dragged to a scribe to explain yourself. Justice in ancient Egypt is swift and very, very sweaty. But now, as the sun inches westward and the sky starts turning that dusty golden pink, it's time to prepare for the evening. The night in Egypt isn't restful, it's simply another shift, just with fewer witnesses. If you're lucky, your tasks are simple, maybe more grain to grind or helping your sister twist flax into linen. But if you're not lucky, well, you might be walking a donkey 3 miles to fetch fresh water because the neighborhood well dried up again. Or maybe you're lighting torches along the market road, dodging drunk priests and avoiding the eye of a royal guard who looks bored enough to ruin your life just for fun. And through all of it, there is sand. Always, always sand. On your skin, in your mouth, in your bed, in your ears, on your food, between your toes, and probably in your dreams. You don't sleep on a bed, you sleep in sand. It becomes part of you. You're not a person anymore. You're a sand-covered prayer waiting to be ignored by a dozen busy gods. When dinner finally arrives, you're too tired to taste it. Probably more of that coarse barley bread, or a stew made with whatever vegetables didn't rot today. Maybe a bit of garlic, if your neighbor traded fair. You chew slowly, mostly because your jaw hurts from grinding teeth all day, and your molars, already worn down from a lifetime of gritty meals, are starting to feel more like tools than teeth. You eat not for pleasure, but to prevent collapse. And if someone cracks a joke or hums a song, you laugh, because laughing is free and it makes the night feel a little less endless. The stars begin to appear now. The desert sky turns deep indigo, velvet black, pierced by constellations that the priests will later turn into stories about gods, fate, and the afterlife. But you don't think about that right now. You're lying back on your straw mat, swatting at the occasional mosquito, trying to ignore the aching in your legs and the itching from whatever bit you earlier. Your family settles in beside. You've stepped on something sharp. Again, you don't even flinch anymore. Is it a rock? A thorn? A forgotten bone from last week's dinner? Who knows? Who cares? Your feet have given up filing complaints. They've accepted their fate. 2 worn slabs of leather that carry the rest of your overworked skeleton through this glorious sandstorm of divine bureaucracy and domestic chaos. Even the sandals, if you have them, offer little relief. They're not ergonomic, they're not padded, they're barely held together by braided reeds and good intentions. After 3 hours of walking, the only thing they've really succeeded at is trapping more sand between your toes. But that's ancient Egypt for you. Life's a game of survival, and the prize for winning is more survival. And just when you think you've caught a break, maybe the breeze feels a little cooler, maybe the sun dips behind a cloud, bam, the gods throw a sandstorm your way. Egypt's version of a divine slap in the face. The skies don't darken gently. No, they hiss. The wind roars like it's angry you exist. Your friend disappears mid-conversation behind a veil of swirling grit. One second, you're trading gossip about the new scribe's haircut. The next, you're coughing up Sahara-flavored mucus and blinking through 2 miniature deserts installed in your eye sockets. Nobody panics. They just squint and walk sideways like cursed crabs. It's normal. It's just life. The storm comes, the storm goes, and if you're lucky, it didn't strip the last layer of skin off your calves or deposit a small dune in your cooking pot. You dust yourself off, pointlessly, and carry on. Because in Egypt, sand isn't a landscape, it's a lifestyle. It's your roommate, your seasoning, your exfoliator, your grave filler. It's in your nose, in your teeth, in your food, under your fingernails, and deeply embedded in the lining of your soul. It's not that sand gets everywhere, it is everywhere. You don't so much fight it as learn to live with it, like a bad marriage, but with less emotional support. And don't even think about washing it off. Sure, you could jump into the Nile, but let's be honest, you already know what's in there. Parasites, mud, the occasional crocodile, also more sand. That's right, the one place you go to clean yourself is also full of the thing you're trying to clean off. You scrub your limbs with a bit of limestone paste and lotus oil, mutter a quick prayer to Sobek so he doesn't bite your leg off, and call it a bath. And speaking of prayers, oh yes, it's time we talk about religion. Because in ancient Egypt, religion isn't just something you do on holy days, it is the calendar, the weather, the traffic laws, the workplace policy. It's the reason you wake up, why you eat what you eat, and the excuse you give when someone asks why your goat is limping. The gods are everywhere, not in a metaphorical warm and fuzzy way. No, they're literally carved into every wall, painted on every jar, chanted in every ritual, and blamed for everything from miscarriages to moldy barley. Ra rides the sun across the sky like he's late for a divine appointment. Thoth, with the head of an ibis and the attitude of a librarian, handles scribes, writing, moon schedules, and probably overdue scrolls. Bastet, the cat goddess, stares at you from every windowsill with divine judgment. She knows what you did. She always knows. Your town has shrines, like other towns have street signs. Each one a tiny divine customer service desk. You want healthy crops? Pray to Osiris. Got a rash on your elbow? Ask Sekhmet, but politely. She once tried to destroy humanity, so maybe bring an offering. Lost your chicken? Could be the fault of Set. god of chaos, storms, and household mischief. Drop a few onions on an altar and hope for the best. But here's the thing, religion in ancient Egypt isn't just fear, it's order. It's how you make sense of an unpredictable world. Why does the Nile flood? Because the gods will it. Why does the sun rise? Because Ra's boat hasn't been eaten by the serpent of chaos yet. Why didn't your bread rise? Maybe you offended Hapi, river god, and part-time baker. Better throw a date or two into the fire just in case. Every action you take has a divine consequence. Before a meal, you offer a bit to the gods. Before you sleep, you mutter a charm to keep evil spirits away. Before you sneeze, you bless yourself, your neighbor's donkey, and the nearest statue of Horus, just to be thorough. And when someone dies, it's not just a funeral, it's an expedition. The soul embarks on a perilous journey through the Duat, the shadowy Egyptian underworld, dodging demons, solving riddles, and navigating metaphysical bureaucracy. Then comes the famous judgment scene. Your heart, seat of your morality, is weighed against the feather of Ma'at, truth, balance, cosmic order. If your heart is light, you pass and get an eternity of lounging in fields of reeds, which is kind of like an eternal farmer's market with fewer taxes and less back pain. But if your heart is heavy, with guilt, lies, or that, let's talk fashion. Linen. Always linen. If you're imagining golden crowns, gem-studded tunics, and Cleopatra's glam squad brushing coal onto your eyelids every morning, think again. That's royal propaganda. If you're an average Egyptian woman, or man for that matter, your wardrobe consists of two things, white linen and slightly dirtier white linen. Your dress is a long, tight tube, and the fashion statement it makes is, "I haven't sat down since last harvest." There are no sewing machines, obviously. Every stitch is handmade. Your clothes are hand-washed in the Nile, beaten with rocks, and dried in the same sun that's currently trying to roast your skin like an offering to Ra. Jewelry? If you're lucky, a clay bead necklace. If you're rich, maybe faience or a scarab pendant. But let's be honest, you'll lose it in the mud during chores, and a chicken will probably steal it before you notice. Now about makeup. Yes, both men and women wear it. Not for vanity, for survival. That dramatic black eyeliner, kohl, is less about serving looks and more about warding off eye infections and evil spirits. It's medicine disguised as fashion, like if your acne cream came in glitter. Green malachite shadow, black soot, crushed lead, all smeared on with bone or ivory sticks, possibly while a child tugs on your leg, a goat eats your laundry, and your neighbor shouts about a stolen papyrus scroll. By the way, that scroll wasn't cheap. Papyrus is precious. Most of it is used for official records, temple accounts, or love poetry written by scribes with suspiciously perfect handwriting. If you're a woman who can read, you're rare. If you're a woman who teaches reading, you're practically divine. But most women? Illiterate, yes. Unintelligent? Absolutely not. These women can track moon phases, balance harvest budgets in their heads, and deliver twins with nothing but a knife, a prayer, and sheer psychological fortitude. Let's swing back to medicine for a moment because, surprise, you've caught something contagious. Again, it's basically Tuesday. And now it's time to seek medical care. No hospitals, no antiseptic, just a vaguely priest-shaped man named Hotep who smells like goat milk and cinnamon. He's technically your doctor, also your spiritual advisor, also probably your neighbor. And he comes armed with the ancient world's favorite prescription, a scroll and a prayer. You describe your symptoms. He nods sagely, pokes your abdomen, then consults a medical papyrus older than your grandmother. Diagnosis? Your liver is angry. Cure? Honey, moldy bread, crushed herbs, and a spell to chase away the evil spirit living in your belly. Sound crazy? Modern science agrees with at least part of it. Honey is antibacterial. Mold contains penicillin. The rest? Hope and a chant. You lie down while Hotep grinds onions and slathers your scalp. You pray this is for the headache and not a test of loyalty to the gods. If it doesn't work, the next treatment involves beer foam and lizard blood. If that doesn't work, someone will suggest rubbing cow dung on your chest and invoking Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of healing and occasional destruction. It's a gamble. 1 minute you're cured, the next you've got a rash and a lion goddess in a bad mood. Surgery? Sure, it exists, sort of. Bones are set with wooden splints. Wounds are stitched using linen soaked in vinegar or wine. There's no anesthesia, just a sharp bronze blade and a relative to hold you down while you scream into a brick. If you survive, great. If not, well, the embalmers will make you look good. Speaking of embalmers, let's talk about death, again. In ancient Egypt, death is a full-time logistical operation. First comes mummification, which means your family pays professionals to yank out your organs through an incision or your nose, dry your body with salt, wrap you in linen, and stuff you with amulets like you're a divine Christmas turkey. You'll be buried with food, clothes, furniture, and maybe even a model servant or two in case you get lazy in the afterlife. If you're rich, the ceremony is elaborate. There are processions, prayers, and a lot of wailing. The louder the mourning, the better your chances with the gods. If you're poor, you still get a few charms, a burial pit, and someone muttering that you were probably a decent guy. And what happens if you were not a decent guy? Well then, a moot awaits. The devourer of unworthy souls. She's got the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the legs of a hippopotamus, which, in case you're wondering, makes her 100% nightmare fuel and zero cuddly. If your heart is found unworthy, she eats it. You disappear. No afterlife, no second chances, just cosmic deletion. Which brings us back to your daily life. Everything, your work, your hygiene, your dinner prep, revolves around avoiding that fate. Because eternity in Egypt isn't a concept, it's a plan. You're preparing for it with every ritual, every offering, every time you stop yourself from stealing a fig that didn't belong to you. And yes, it's exhausting. Dresses in ancient Egypt were light and breathable, great news in theory. But there's a catch: no underwear. And unless you're rich, no shoes either. That means the moment you step outside, you're at the mercy of the world's worst pedicure. Hot stones, gravel, and sand so coarse it might as well be made of tiny knives. Your skin bakes under the sun, your sweat has no escape. And the bugs, they're not pests, they're predators. You're basically a walking buffet. Want to freshen up with some makeup? Sure, why not? Egyptian women did wear cosmetics, a glamorous mix of crushed minerals and ground-up intentions. Black coal lined the eyes, green malachite dusted the lids, and red ochre tinted the lips. Sounds luxurious until you realize the eyeliner is lead-based and applied with a stick that looks suspiciously like a toothpick someone found in the dirt. You're not beautifying, you're playing chemical roulette with your face. But let's say you hit the birth lottery and you're born into a wealthy family. Things do look brighter. You might read and write, rare and valuable skills. You could manage estates, oversee servants, or even become a priestess. You're probably not hauling water at dawn or grinding wheat until your spine sings with pain. If you're born royal, then you could become something extraordinary, a queen, a regent, even a pharaoh. Women like Hatshepsut and Cleopatra didn't just rule, they redefined what power looked like. They commanded armies, negotiated with emperors, and wore enough eyeliner to intimidate entire dynasties. But for the poor, for most, rights were legal, yes, but life was still labor. Your daily calendar is written in blisters and sweat. You grind grain until your knuckles ache. You carry jars of water heavier than your dreams. You give birth without medicine, bury loved ones with your own hands, and live on bread so sandy it could double as building material. You're not shackled by law, but by necessity, by the relentlessness of survival. Still, ancient Egyptian women had agency, and that mattered. They could go to court and win. They could own land, inherit property, and keep it after marriage. They didn't vanish into their husbands' names. Compared to the rights of women in ancient Greece or Rome, where women were barely above property, this was revolutionary. But don't mistake rights for luxury. Your life wasn't gilded, it was gritty. The only people truly comfortable in Egypt were statues, and even they had to be washed, dressed, and worshipped daily. Let's say you survive the day. You fed your children, patched your sandals, again, endured another sunstorm, and avoided offending any gods, an achievement worthy of a monument. Finally, it's nighttime. The air cools, you lie on your stiff palm fiber mat with a stone pillow under your neck. You exhale. You're ready to rest. But here's the thing about ancient Egypt. The real test begins after you die. Because death, it's not the end. It's the beginning of the most complicated after-party in human history. When you die in Egypt, you don't just drift off. You start a multi-phase bureaucratic nightmare through the duat, or underworld, a journey so complex it requires a spiritual survival guide, personal preparation, and more divine paperwork than your entire earthly life. First stop, the Hall of Ma'at, ancient Egypt's version of Judgment Day, only with a better dress code and more crocodiles. There, you're dragged in front of 42 divine judges, yes, 42, where you must give a speech called the Negative Confession. You proclaim, "I did not steal, I did not lie, I did not kill, I did not covet my neighbor's donkey." It's a divine deposition, and you better mean every word, or at least say it with enough sincerity to fool a god. Then comes the main event, the weighing of the heart. See, Egyptians believed your heart held the truth of your soul. It gets placed on a golden scale opposite a feather, the feather of Ma'at, representing justice, truth, and cosmic balance. If your heart is lighter than the feather, congratulations, you were a good person. You may proceed to eternity. If your heart is heavier, enter Amut. Let's pause here. Amut is a creature built by a nightmare architect who clearly had trust issues. She's part lion, part crocodile, part hippo, a Frankenstein beast designed to ruin your afterlife. She doesn't imprison you, she doesn't forgive you, she eats your soul. You are erased from existence. No rebirth, no heaven, just spiritual vaporization. In a culture obsessed with eternity, this is worse than hell. And here's the kicker. You can fail not just by what you did, but by what you say. Say the wrong line, forget a prayer, mispronounce a name. Boom, soul snack. If you do pass, welcome to the a mixture of honey, moldy bread, and divine intervention. Maybe your local healer will recite a spell while rubbing fermented goat milk on your forehead. Maybe not. Either way, if you're lucky, you'll pull through. If you're not, well, hopefully your family saved up for a proper burial and didn't forget the spells that help your soul not get eaten again. Because remember, dying in ancient Egypt is just the beginning of the most heavily micromanaged afterlife journey imaginable. But let's rewind. Before you get to the great cosmic courtroom, you still have a long road filled with trials, heat, more sand, and the occasional parasitic worm. Because life, for most Egyptians, wasn't just hard, it was a full-time test. From the moment you wake up on your straw mat, which pokes you in the back like it holds a personal grudge, to the moment you collapse at night, you're moving, carrying, scrubbing, hauling, praying. Even rest is conditional. You can't just lie down and dream of the field of reeds. No, you need to be careful what direction you sleep in, what amulet you wear to bed, what prayers you mutter under your breath in case a ghost or spirit decides to wander through your window, which, by the way, is probably just a hole in the wall. And let's not forget the job market, truly cursed. If you're not a farmer toiling from sunrise to sunset, you might be building tombs. Ironically, the best housing in ancient Egypt is for dead people. Pharaohs get pyramids. You get a mud brick house that leaks dust, collects bugs, and occasionally collapses in the rain. Not that it rains often. As for your meals, bread, more bread, maybe onions. If you're feeling festive, a date or two. But that bread is ground with sand and stone, so your teeth, what's left of them, are being worn down like chalk on pavement. By the time you're 30, you're chewing with gums and regrets. And if you're wondering about healthcare, remember, medicine is a toss-up between this mold might save you and here, let me chant to a bird-headed god while you drink this copper and lizard broth. There are good days, of course. Festival days, Nile floods that actually help crops grow, days where the gods seem satisfied and nobody in your village gets possessed by a vengeful spirit. Maybe you even catch a nap in the shade or get a sip of cool beer, which, by the way, is safer to drink than the Nile water and probably thicker than your soup. But those are rare. Because in ancient Egypt, the default mode of existence is grind. Your body aches, your skin burns, your spirit hopes. And through it all, you live by one rule: balance. You're part of a cosmic equation: life, death, rebirth. And if you mess up, the universe notices. You're not just working to survive, you're working to be remembered, to be buried with dignity, to pass that final test where your heart, chipped, cracked, and overworked, is weighed against the symbol of perfect truth. And if it's heavier, a mitt awaits. But if you live well, pray hard, and wear just the right amount of coal while whispering apologies to a falcon-headed god, you might just make it. Floaty linen, busted teeth, spiritual dread, and all. Now, rest. Because in ancient Egypt, every sunrise is a blessing, every breath is a gamble, and every nap might be your last rehearsal for the afterlife. In ancient Egypt, and even a humble loaf of bread could mean survival for someone desperate enough. So grave robbing wasn't just a crime of greed, it was sometimes a crime of necessity. The constant threat of robbery meant that the ancient Egyptians developed a whole culture around protection and secrecy, not just physical defenses, but spiritual ones too. The walls of tombs were often inscribed with spells from the Book of the Dead, designed to confuse, scare, or curse anyone who dared disturb the eternal rest of the departed. Sometimes these spells described terrifying monsters guarding the burial chambers, from serpents coiled in shadow to undead warriors wielding fiery swords. The idea wasn't just to protect the body, but to defend the soul on its journey through the perilous underworld. But even with all that, tomb robbers usually won. And that's why the Egyptians placed such a huge emphasis on remembering the dead through stories, names, and monuments. Because even if your body was destroyed or stolen, your name and legacy had to survive to keep your soul alive. That's why so many ancient Egyptians invested time and energy into building massive pyramids, elaborate temples, and beautiful statues. These weren't just vanity projects, they were spiritual insurance policies, places where your memory would linger, your name would be spoken, and your spirit would never be forgotten. And there's something powerful about that idea, isn't there? That even in a world where death was brutal and often premature, people still dreamed of eternity, of a peaceful paradise waiting beyond the scorching desert sun. They believed that if they lived rightly, honored the gods, and prepared well enough, they could escape the chaos of life and death and sail forever on the gentle waters of the Nile in the field of reeds. So yeah, ancient Egypt was tough. Hot sun, flying sand, dangerous animals, hard labor, and the ever-present threat of death. But it was also a civilization filled with deep faith, clever innovation, and a fierce determination to hold on to hope, no matter how dark things got. And that, more than anything, is the real magic they left behind. Tools were precious beyond what we might imagine today. Linen wasn't just fabric, it was a form of currency, a symbol of wealth and status woven into every thread. And here's the twist. Tomb robbing wasn't always a crime of greed. Sometimes it was an act born from sheer desperation. Ancient Egypt, for all its grandeur, wasn't immune to famine, political chaos, and invasion. When food ran out and the fields turned barren, even the most devout workers might be driven to break into tombs, not for gold or jewels, but for something far more basic: food. Picture this. A starving family, children's stomachs growling louder than the cries of the desert wind. What once was sacred, a funeral offering, a pot of beer, a loaf of bread, suddenly looks like a precious meal. Survival trumps spirituality, and the holy relics of the dead become sustenance for the living. So in ancient Egypt, death didn't guarantee safety. Your carefully wrapped mummy could be disturbed, your golden amulets plundered, your tomb desecrated by someone desperate enough to risk divine curses and earthly punishment. Rest in peace only if no one knows where your tomb is hidden. And then there are the hieroglyphs, those mesmerizing, intricate carvings that decorate temples and tombs, full of birds, snakes, lotus flowers, and men walking sideways like models on a catwalk. They look stunning, almost like a secret visual code. But reading them, that's a different story. Hieroglyphs weren't just pretty pictures. They were a complex writing system with over 700 characters, each packed with meaning. Some symbols represented whole words, others stood for sounds, and many were determinatives, little clarifiers that helped the reader understand the exact meaning. Imagine trying to write the word star by drawing a star. Too simple. The Egyptians preferred to keep things intricate. No spaces, no punctuation, just a flowing stream of symbols that could be read left to right to left, or top to bottom, depending entirely on what the scribe decided that day. Want a tip? Follow the direction the birds and people faced. That's your reading guide. Birds facing right? Read right to left. Facing left? Flip it. Upside down? You're on your own. Learning to write hieroglyphs was no small feat. Literacy was rare. Maybe only about 1% of the population could read or write. To become a scribe, you had to start young, enduring years of grueling training, memorize hundreds of symbols, copy endless scrolls, and practice writing until your hand cramped and curled like a claw. By the time you were 15, you'd have mastered a skill that set you far above the common folk. And the rewards? Immense. Scribes were highly respected, well-fed, and spared from the brutal manual labor that marked daily life for most Egyptians. While others hauled bricks under the scorching sun, scribes sat in cool rooms, carefully crafting tax records, court documents, letters, and sacred texts. They were the silent rulers of ancient Egyptian society, wielding power through the pen rather than the sword. For everyone else, hieroglyphs were almost magical. Writing someone's name was believed to preserve their soul forever. Erasing it? That was spiritual annihilation, wiping them from existence itself. So yes, spelling wasn't just important. It was a matter of life and death. In the end, hieroglyphs are like ancient emoji, but on steroids, wrapped in myth, mathematics, and mystery. Beautiful to behold, impossible to master without years of devotion. After 14 chapters of relentless heat, hunger, swirling sandstorms, unshakable superstition, and backbreaking labor, it's time for the big question. Would you survive a single day in ancient Egypt? Let's be honest, probably not. Sure, the majestic pyramids and golden treasures are stunning, but the reality? A world where every breath is a battle, every step is pain, and every night could be your last. So what do you think? Would you last? Or would ancient Egypt chew you up and spit you out like one of its endless desert storms? It's easy to romanticize the ancient world. Golden tombs, lotus-scented air, graceful hieroglyphs, gods with animal heads, and a love for order and beauty. But behind those iconic monuments and stunning art lay brutal realities that spared no one except the elite. Your average Egyptian day began on a dirt floor, surrounded by a cloud of flies and the harsh truth that if you didn't work, you didn't eat. You walked barefoot on blazing sand, hauled water from the Nile, cooked over open fires, and lived shoulder to shoulder with bugs, smoke, and livestock. You worried about disease, divine punishment, and whether a snake might slither into your sleeping mat. There was no toothpaste, no medicine, no retirement plan. And if you were lucky, maybe 2 changes of linen. You served a god king who could take your land with a single decree, endured a climate that baked your skin by noon, and believed in a religion that demanded you pass a divine test after death just to reach the good version of the afterlife. And that's not all. You didn't have antibiotics, sunscreen, privacy, plumbing, painkillers, or any easy escape. Once born into your class, that was your fate. No promotions, no career changes, no chance to find yourself. You were a scribe, a farmer, a laborer, a mother, a servant, or dead. And yet, despite all this, the ancient Egyptians weren't miserable. They believed deeply in their gods, their purpose, and the beauty of life. They loved music, dance, food, family, and festivals. They joked, they painted, they imagined eternity with enough clarity to build stone monuments that still stand today. But for a modern person, without your air conditioning, filtered water, Advil, sneakers, and smartphone, you'd fold before the second sandstorm hit. So no, you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt, but that's okay, because they lasted thousands of years, and maybe, just maybe, that's why we still talk about them. Far away in the heart of ancient Teotihuacan, one pyramid refuses to be forgotten. Unlike the serene temples of Egypt, its surface is covered not with peaceful symbols or gentle gods, but with snarling, open-mouthed stone serpents, dozens of them. They jut out from the temple's facade as if frozen mid-strike, fangs bared, eyes wide, ready to bite. This is the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, known as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. Unlike most temples that reach for the sky with reverence, this one feels predatory. From the moment you approach, there's an eerie sense that you're being watched. The stone serpents' heads aren't mere decoration, they're warnings, symbols of divine wrath. And beneath their gaze, something horrific once unfolded. Excavations over recent decades have revealed more than ceremonial offerings beneath the temple's base. They found human remains. Not just a few, but over 200 bodies, many decapitated, hands bound behind their backs. Young men, warriors perhaps, buried in groups, ritual sacrifices arranged with mathematical precision. Some lay with obsidian knives at their sides, others with necklaces made of human teeth or jewelry crafted from jawbones. They weren't tossed into the ground randomly, they were deliberately positioned, each placement heavy with symbolic meaning. This was no mass grave. It was a message, a divine transaction carved into stone and sealed with blood. But what kind of belief system demands such horror? Who called for so many lives to be taken at once? The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a religious building, it was a theater of power, a place where rulers fused cosmology, warfare, and fear to maintain control over a city of more than 100,000 souls. And this ritual bloodletting may have been the cost of keeping the cosmos in balance. Today, as you stand before this temple, staring at those stone serpents, you're not just looking at art or architecture. You're looking into the eyes of a civilization that believed their gods demanded blood, and that they had every right to deliver it. But who were these people, the ones who commanded such violence and then vanished without a trace? The answer lies in the shadows of Teotihuacan. Before the mighty Aztec Empire, before the Maya carved their cosmic calendar into stone, there stood a city unlike any other in the ancient Americas, Teotihuacan. Its name, given by later Aztecs, means the place where gods were born. Walking down its vast avenue of the dead, flanked by pyramids scraping the heavens, you start to understand why. At its height, around 100 to 250 CE, Teotihuacan was a sprawling metropolis of over 100,000 people, one of the largest cities in the world at the time, rivaling ancient Rome, Alexandria, and Chang'an in size and influence. It was a city meticulously planned, wide boulevards, gridded streets, apartment compounds housing extended families, multi-story structures made from volcanic stone. And at its center stood 3 massive pyramids, the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Sun, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. But here's what makes Teotihuacan unique. How did a city with no known writing system maintain such a vast network and command authority across Mesoamerica? The answer may lie in how they fused cosmic ideology with statecraft. Their temples were more than places of worship. They were instruments of control, perfectly aligned with astronomical events, serving as theaters of ritual sacrifice, and constantly reminding every citizen and visitor that Teotihuacan was no ordinary city. It was the axis of the world, a sacred engine keeping time, fate, and blood flowing in perfect sync. At the heart of it all stood the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. To understand the temple, you must first understand the deity it was dedicated to, the feathered serpent. Known later by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl and to the Maya as Kukulkan, this figure is one of the most enigmatic gods in all of Mesoamerican mythology. But centuries before the Aztecs rose to power, the feathered serpent was already central, perhaps the supreme divine force in Teotihuacan. Here's the paradox. What kind of god is both serpent and bird? Think about that. Serpents slither through the underworld, shedding their skin, a symbol of rebirth, duality, and death. Birds soar high in the sky, closer to the sun, representing freedom, divinity, and life-giving wind. To combine these two, earthbound and sky-dwelling, death and life, chaos and order, was to create something cosmic, something terrifyingly powerful. The feathered serpent wasn't just a god, he was a bridge between worlds. Across the temple's facade, carved in deep relief, dozens of images portray this figure: gobbled eyes, bared teeth, plumed headdresses. Some historians argue these images represent the god himself, while others suggest they show warriors or priests dressed in divine regalia, signaling their authority. Either way, they are everywhere, as if the temple itself breathes with divine presence. But the feathered serpent wasn't merely a god of the heavens. He was intimately tied to sacrifice. Blood was the fuel keeping the cosmos in motion. Though later remembered as a gentle civilizing deity, Quetzalcoatl in Teotihuacan demanded offerings, and not just maize or incense, but life itself. In some myths, he descended into the underworld to retrieve the bones of the dead and create humankind. But to bring life from death, there had to be a trade. The gods sacrificed themselves for humanity, and humans, in turn, were expected to do the same. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a monument to faith, it was a cosmic engine designed to link the sky, the earth, and the underworld through ritual. Every stone, every serpent head, every buried victim fed into that system. Teotihuacanos didn't just worship the feathered serpent, they embodied his logic, paradox, power, and blood. But the most disturbing truths lay hidden beneath the surface. For centuries, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent stood silently, weathered, imposing, half swallowed by time. Locals whispered legends, scholars made guesses, but no one could have imagined what was buried beneath its layered stones until archaeologists broke through in the late 1980s and early 2000s. What they found was not just unexpected, it was unsettling. Beneath the temple's foundations lay a series of long-sealed chambers and pits, each filled with carefully arranged human remains. These were not the messy results of war or disease. These were deliberate, systematic, ritualistic sacrifices, cold and calculated. The victims numbered over 200, mostly young men between 15 and 25 years old. Some wore necklaces made from human jawbones, others had their hands bound behind their backs. A few were decapitated. Obsidian knives, sharp and black as night, were scattered nearby. The unmistakable tools of ritual slaughter. And it gets darker. The arrangement of bodies followed geometric and symbolic patterns. They were not buried randomly. They were placed in quadrants, aligned with the cardinal directions, possibly mirroring the cosmos itself. Even the number of bodies mattered. This was not just about death, it was meaningful death. Offerings surrounded the victims: jaguar bones, serpents, exotic shells from the distant Gulf Coast, figurines, and obsidian blades never used in battle. This was not punishment, it was a gift. These young men, likely warriors, had been chosen not to die in disgrace, but as part of something transcendent. To the Teotihuacanos, building a temple may have required human sacrifice. It was as if every stone had to be consecrated with blood, every new layer raised only after an offering had been made. The deeper archaeologists dug, the more sacrifice. Associated with war, sacrifice, and rebirth, Venus was more than just a planet to the people of Teotihuacan. When Venus rose or set, wars were declared, offerings made, and temples ignited with ritual fire. Even the temple's dimensions seem intentional. Repetition of the number 7, the number of visible planetary bodies, appears in its stepped platforms. There is symmetry, rhythm, and a stunning understanding of both earthly mathematics and cosmic cycles. Beneath the surface, more clues awaited discovery. In 2003, archaeologists uncovered a tunnel beneath the temple. Not a crude passage, but a deliberately constructed subterranean world. The walls were once coated with powdered pyrite, a shimmering mineral that would have reflected light like starlight. Combined with pools of mercury and mica-lined walls, the tunnel seemed designed to replicate the cosmos itself. To walk through it would be like traveling through the Milky Way, a symbolic journey to the underworld, or perhaps to rebirth. Was this temple not just a place of sacrifice, but a cosmic machine, a portal aligning earth, sky, and spirit? Some scholars believe Teotihuacan saw time as circular, not linear. Every ritual, every building, every sacrifice was not a one-time event, but part of an eternal cycle. Death leading to renewal, sacrifice fueling rebirth. The temple's alignments may have helped predict celestial movements, coordinate harvests, and most importantly, mark the time to offer blood. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just looking at the stars, it was trying to speak to them. But the temple was more than a spiritual beacon, it was a political weapon. Its very design was meant to overwhelm, to intimidate, to remind every viewer, local or foreign, who held the reins of power in Teotihuacan. Imagine standing in its shadow 1,800 years ago. You, a visitor from a smaller city-state, arrive at the Avenue of the Dead, already awestruck by the sheer scale of Teotihuacan. But when you reach the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, you freeze. The serpent heads stare at you, fangs bared. Jaguar symbols growl from the stone. The plaza ahead once held massive gatherings, not just for celebration, but for public ritual. You might even witness a sacrifice. The ruling elite understood something crucial. Fear is power. And nothing stirs fear like divine wrath. By orchestrating ritual executions in broad daylight, surrounded by cosmic symbols and death imagery, they sent a clear message. The gods are with us, and we are not afraid to feed them. But this wasn't chaos. This was theater. Priests in feathered headdresses and obsidian masks chanted, danced, and spilled blood, turning cosmic myth into political performance. It wasn't just about pleasing the gods, it was about reminding everyone watching that the city's rulers had direct access to the divine. They alone could open the heavens, summon rain, protect the people, or destroy their enemies. Even the architecture reinforced this propaganda. From the temple's upper tiers, leaders looked down upon the plaza. They controlled not just the narrative, but the very physical space in which it unfolded. The people looked up at the gods, the rulers, the sacrifices, and knew their place. For outsiders, Teotihuacan didn't need to conquer with swords. It conquered with symbols. Visiting dignitaries carried home tales of awe and terror. They spoke of feathered serpents, endless avenues, blood rituals that lit the sky red. In a world where gods ruled through fear, Teotihuacan positioned itself as their chosen mouthpiece, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was the loudest voice of all. At its peak, Teotihuacan was the heartbeat of Mesoamerica, a city of fire and stone, of gods and blood, a city that seemed destined to last forever. But around the year 550 CE, something changed. Something broke. And the silence that followed was as chilling as the temple's stone serpent heads. The fall of Teotihuacan was not loud or glorious. It was gradual, then sudden. Signs of strain appeared decades earlier: drought, crop failure, social unrest. The very systems that sustained this grand city, centralized power, religious dominance, cosmic order, began to crack under pressure. And then, the fire. Archaeologists uncovered widespread burn layers across elite compounds, temples, and administrative buildings, including signs of violent destruction at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. What's strange is that the lower-class residential areas were mostly untouched. This was not an external invasion. This was an uprising, a rebellion, possibly from within. The very people who cracking open the secrets buried within its heart, the early 20th century saw Mexican archaeologists begin excavating Teotihuacan. What they found was astonishing, a perfectly engineered city far older than the Aztecs. But it wasn't until the 1980s and 2000s that the temple itself began to yield its most intimate and chilling revelations. One of the most dramatic discoveries came in 2011 when researchers uncovered a sealed tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. It had been deliberately closed off nearly 1,800 years earlier, as if to prevent anyone from entering ever again. After years of excavation, scientists unearthed a cosmic corridor, a symbolic underworld lined with pyrite mimicking a starlit sky, pools of liquid mercury, and thousands of ritual objects, jade statues, rubber balls, obsidian blades, even carved wooden masks. It felt less like a tomb and more like a message. Why would the ancient builders go to such lengths? What were they trying to preserve or hide? Some experts believe the tunnel was used in initiation rituals. Others suggest it symbolized the creation of the world, a mythological womb where gods were born, where kings were made, where divine order was negotiated between humans and the cosmos. The mercury, once thought only toxic, may have represented water, the fluid veil between worlds. And among all these glittering fragments was one persistent whisper. The feathered serpent still lingered, not just as a myth, but as a presence. In murals, in carvings, in the very geometry of the temple itself, the serpent hadn't disappeared. It had coiled inward, deep into the bones of the city, waiting to be rediscovered. With each excavation, each uncovered jawbone or golden ornament, we draw a little closer to its message, one carved not in language, but in stone, sacrifice, and shadow. Modern science has given us X-rays, drones, and ground-penetrating radar. But even with all our tools, one truth remains: the temple still keeps secrets. Today, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent stands as a haunting monument, not just to a civilization long gone, but to a way of thinking that merged power, cosmos, and death into one unbreakable system. Tourists snap photos, children run past the stone serpent heads, but the ground beneath their feet is soaked in 1,000 untold stories and over 200 known human sacrifices. And still, the temple endures. Its legacy is not just architectural, it is psychological, spiritual, cultural. The feathered serpent, this paradoxical god of sky and earth, continued to evolve. He was adopted by the Toltecs, then reborn by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, where his myth took on a gentler tone, the bringer of knowledge, the god who wept for humanity, the one who vowed to return. This reimagining of the serpent god shows how myths don't die, they transform. Even in modern Mexico, echoes of the feathered serpent persist, in art, in murals, in literature, and in national identity. The temple's image has appeared on coins, stamps, and even government buildings. It has become a symbol of mystery, of pre-Columbian brilliance, and of the untamed spiritual world that once pulsed through Mesoamerica. But there is another legacy, one less visible, more uncomfortable. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent forces us to confront the price of belief. It asks hard questions. How far will humans go to feel connected to the divine? What happens when power and religion become indistinguishable? Can beauty coexist with terror? In many ways, the temple isn't just a historical site. It is a mirror, a reflection of us. Our fascination with life after death, our hunger for meaning, our capacity to build monuments of staggering beauty and to stain them with blood. The temple teaches us that greatness comes with shadows, that civilizations can soar to impossible heights while burying their secrets beneath the stones. And maybe that's why we keep returning, not just to visit, but to understand. Because deep down, we know the serpent is still watching, not to strike, but to remind us of what we once were and what we still might be. Before we spoke in words, we spoke in rhythm. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before the invention of writing, even before the birth of language itself, early humans began to create something that could only be described as sound with intention. Not speech, not melody, but rhythm. A hand slapping hollow bark, a stick tapping a stone, a foot stomping earth in time. Somewhere in that ancient repetition, something magical emerged, the first drum beat. It wasn't called music because even when we had no words, we had rhythm, and that rhythm was everything. In the cradle of early human civilization, drums were not merely instruments, they were sacred voices. Every tribe, every culture, every corner of the earth developed its own rhythm, yet their purpose was nearly universal: to commune with the unseen, to bridge the worlds of the living and the divine. In Africa, where some of the world's earliest drums emerged, rhythm was deeply intertwined with life, death, and ancestry. The gombe, carved from a single tree and wrapped in goatskin, was believed to contain 3 spirits: the spirit of the tree from which it was carved, the animal whose skin gave it voice, and the craftsman who breathed life into it. When played in circles, the gombe wasn't just accompaniment, it was the ritual itself. West Africa's talking drums could mimic human speech, sending messages across vast distances, relaying news, warnings, births, and deaths from village to village. Long before the invention of the telephone, humans were drumming their messages across the landscape. Across the oceans, Native American tribes treated the drum as a living entity, the heartbeat of Mother Earth. It was played in ceremonies to honor ancestors, summon healing, and guide souls into the afterlife. The large powwow drum, played by a circle of drummers, served as both musical engine and spiritual pulse, synchronizing human spirit with nature. In Australia, the Aboriginal people used clapsticks and percussive stomps during the sacred dream time, the mythic era of creation. In the Arctic, Inuit shamans struck frame drums to enter trance states, seeking visions or communing with spirits during the long winter nights. These were not mere performances, they were acts of survival, healing, storytelling, and connection. To drum was to remember, to drum was to belong. And always, it was communal. Drums brought people together into sacred circles, synchronizing hearts and intentions. There was no sheet music, no stage, only bodies moving, hands striking, and souls stirring, unified by rhythm. It didn't matter where on earth you stood. If you heard a drum in the distance, you knew something sacred was happening, something words alone could never express. From sacred circles to bloody battlefields, the drum has always spoken, sometimes with comfort, sometimes with command. As human societies grew into kingdoms and empires, drums transformed. They became tools of domination, instruments of order, and weapons of fear. The earliest armies had no radios, no megaphones. They had drums. In ancient China, massive drums called bo resonated across battlefields to coordinate troops. One powerful boom could signal charge, retreat, or a flanking maneuver. These drums were not just loud, they were strategic, with each rhythm carrying a specific command. Soldiers trained to hear and obey these signals even amidst the chaos of war. In Mesopotamia, temple drums announced rulers and summoned the public. But during conflict, their thunderous echoes rattled city walls and terrified enemies. It was more than percussion, it was psychological warfare. When the Romans marched, they brought the tympanum, a frame drum used in religious processions and by cults like that of Cybele. Though not strictly a battlefield instrument, it symbolized empire, discipline, and order. Yet, no army wielded drums quite like the Ottomans. Their mether bands, often regarded as the world's first military orchestras, unleashed a storm of drums, cymbals, and horns before battle. The relentless pounding of giant kettle drums struck fear deep into enemy ranks.
Some European soldiers reportedly froze, paralyzed by the overwhelming sound before even seeing the Ottoman forces. But drums were not confined to battlefields. Across Asia, Africa, and Europe, royal courts used drum ensembles to announce arrivals, mark coronations, and underscore political rituals. To beat a drum was to declare power is present. Even enslaved people in the Americas used drums as tools of resistance. On plantations, rhythmic communication preserved culture and helped orchestrate secret rebellion. Despite oppression, the drum refused to be silenced. Whether signaling divine right, military discipline, or raw fear, the drum has always spoken. This is who rules. This is who marches. This is the rhythm of power. As civilizations spread across continents, their rhythms evolved in form, purpose, and philosophy. In the East, drums became instruments of precision, spirituality, and ceremony.